It was supposed to be easy. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, progressive icon with millions of followers, invited to testify before a Senate committee. Friendly Democrats on the panel. Adoring activists in the gallery. National media coverage. The perfect platform to promote her vision of economic justice. She delivered a fiery opening statement, attacking corporate welfare, mocking conservative senators, and celebrating her track record. The room erupted in applause. She was winning. Then Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana asked a simple question. Didn't Amazon promise 25,000 jobs to your district? It seemed like nothing, a basic fact check, but something in AOC's face changed. A flash of panic. And Kennedy, this unassuming senator with a country accent. He noticed. What happened next shocked everyone in that room. Question after question, document after document, Kennedy methodically exposed a record that didn't match the rhetoric. Tesla, the Met Gala, January 6th, the Green New Deal. Each answer made things worse. 15 minutes later, AOC stormed out calling it a witch hunt. But the cameras had caught everything. And the internet would make sure nobody forgot. The Senate hearing room on the afternoon of March 15, 2025 carried the particular tension that precedes political theater. C-SPAN cameras were positioned at 3 angles, their red lights glowing like warning beacons. The gallery was packed, progressive activists in the front rows, their tax the rich buttons gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Journalists crammed shoulder to shoulder in the back, fingers poised over laptop keyboards. The Senate Committee on Oversight and Economic Development had convened for what was supposed to be a straightforward hearing on the impact of state tax incentives on job creation. The topic was dry enough to normally draw a half-empty room and drowsy coverage. But today was different. Today, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had been invited as an expert witness. At the dais, senators settled into their leather chairs. On the Democratic side, they looked pleased, even smug. They'd orchestrated this invitation carefully, giving their rising star a national platform to promote progressive economic policy. On the Republican side, most senators wore expressions of polite resignation, already drafting their counterstatements for the inevitable evening news cycle. All except one. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana sat at the far end of the Republican side, barely visible to the cameras. At 74, he cut an unassuming figure, reading glasses perched on his nose, a yellow legal pad covered in his careful handwriting, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He wore a navy suit that had seen better days, and a tie his wife had probably picked out 15 years ago. He looked like someone's kindly grandfather, perhaps a retired insurance salesman or small-town pharmacist. That was precisely the point. Kennedy had built a career on being underestimated. His Louisiana drawl was as thick as molasses, his folksy demeanor disarming, his questions seemingly naive. Then with surgical precision, he would dismantle witnesses with facts they couldn't refute and logic they couldn't escape. His colleagues called it the Louisiana smile. You didn't realize you'd been cut until you saw the blood. The chamber doors opened and the murmur of conversation died. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez entered like she was walking onto a stage, which in essence she was. At 35, she'd mastered the art of political performance. The cameras loved her, social media loved her, her millions of followers hung on every tweet, every Instagram video, every viral moment. She wore a burgundy suit that probably cost more than most of her constituents' monthly rent. Her hair perfectly styled, her posture radiating confidence. She took her seat at the witness table, adjusted the microphone, and smiled at the friendly faces on the Democratic side of the dais. Senator Warren gave her an encouraging nod. Senator Sanders, her political godfather, looked pleased. Committee Chairman Roberts, a moderate Democrat from Connecticut, gave the hearing to order. The committee will come to order. We're honored today to welcome Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York's 14th Congressional District to share her insights on progressive economic development strategies. Ocasio-Cortez leaned into the microphone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful for this opportunity. What followed was vintage AOC. A 20-minute opening statement delivered with the passion of a revival preacher and the confidence of someone who'd never been truly challenged. She spoke without notes, her voice rising and falling with practiced rhythm. For too long, she began, we've watched states and cities grovel at the feet of corporate America. offering billions in tax breaks and subsidies in what can only be called legalized bribery. All for the promise, the empty promise of job creation. Her voice grew stronger. We've watched billionaires play states against each other like chess pieces, extracting every possible concession while workers struggle to afford rent, while schools crumble, while infrastructure fails. And we're told this is just how the game is played, that we have no choice, that we must bow to corporate power or be left behind. She paused for effect, her eyes sweeping the room. Well, I'm here to tell you we have a choice, and some of us have made it. The progressive activists in the gallery murmured their approval. In my district, we faced this exact scenario. Amazon, one of the richest corporations in human history, owned by the richest man in the world, demanded nearly $3 billion in tax incentives to build their headquarters in Queens. $3 billion that could have gone to schools, to hospitals, to infrastructure. And when we said no, when we stood up to corporate greed, we were told we were foolish. We were told we'd killed jobs. We were told we didn't understand economics. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to something intimate, conspiratorial. Well, let me tell you what happened. Amazon came to New York anyway without the tax breaks, without the corporate welfare, because they needed us more than we needed them. And we saved billions of dollars that can now go to the people who actually need it. The activists applauded. Chairman Roberts made a half-hearted attempt to gavel them quiet. This is the model we need across America. AOC continued. No more corporate welfare. No more billionaire handouts. No more using our tax dollars to line the pockets of the wealthy while working people suffer. Then her tone shifted, became almost mocking. Now, I know some senators here might not understand this. Some senators, particularly from certain southern states that have made a business model out of corporate welfare, might think this approach is crazy. They might think, to borrow a phrase, that you can land on the sun if you go at night. A few people in the gallery laughed. Kennedy's smile didn't waver, though anyone watching closely would have noticed his pen pause for just a moment on the legal pad. These same senators, AOC continued, warming to her theme, represent states where oil companies write the laws, where workers have no rights, where environmental protections are jokes. They take corporate donations by the truckload and then lecture us about fiscal responsibility. Well, the American people are tired of it. They're tired of being sold out. They're tired of senators who work for ExxonMobil instead of for them. She sat back, her closing line delivered with complete confidence. It's time we stop letting corporations dictate our economic policy. It's time we put people over profits. Thank you. The progressive half of the gallery erupted in applause. Chairman Roberts let it go on for a few seconds. This was, after all, good television before jing them to order. Thank you, Representative Ocasio-Cortez. We'll now begin questions from committee members. We'll use the standard 5-minute rule. Senator Kennedy. Kennedy had been methodically underlining sections of his notes throughout AOC's statement. Now he slowly removed his reading glasses and set them on the table in front of him. He took a sip of water. He cleared his throat. He looked at AOC with the same gentle expression a grandfather might use when about to explain to a child why jumping off the roof wouldn't work out well. Well now, Congresswoman, he began, his Louisiana draw thick and slow as honey. That was quite a performance. Reminded me of a mockingbee bird we had back home. Lots of noise early in the morning. Very passionate, but I always wondered if there was any substance behind all that chirping. A few nervous laughs rippled through the room. AOC's smile tightened slightly. You've had your say, and you said it beautifully. Kennedy continued. Very inspiring. Almost made me want to join a protest. But if the chairman permits, I'd like to ask the Congresswoman a few questions about this remarkable record of economic leadership she's so proud of. Chairman Roberts nodded, already looking like he regretted the entire hearing. The senator is recognized. Kennedy leaned back in his chair. The very picture of casual interest. Now, Congresswoman, you mentioned corporate welfare. You're very passionate about it. I appreciate passion, but let's talk about your track record on jobs. Shall we? Because I've been doing some reading and I had to tell you, I'm a little confused. He put his reading glasses back on and picked up a document. You mentioned Amazon. That's a good place to start. You famously opposed Amazon's HQ2 in New York City. Is that correct? AOC nodded, her confidence intact. That's correct, Senator, and I'm proud of that decision. Oh, I can tell you're proud. Kennedy said amiably. You wore that pride like a championship belt. Tweeted about it. Gave interviews. Really celebrated that victory. Now, help me understand something. And I'm just a simple country lawyer. So forgive me if I'm missing something obvious. But didn't Amazon promise to create about 25,000 to 40,000 jobs in Queens? They made promises. AOC said dismissively. Corporations always make promises. Indeed, they do. Kennedy agreed. Indeed, they do. But let's talk specifics because I have here the actual agreement that was on the table. He held up a thick document. According to this agreement, Amazon committed to creating 25,000 jobs with an average salary of approximately $150. That's $3.75 billion in annual wages. The economic impact study commissioned by New York State, not by Amazon, estimated a total economic benefit of $27.5 billion over 25 years. He set the document down and looked at AOC over his glasses. Now, Congresswoman, that seems like a lot of money for Queens. For your district. Help me understand why that was bad for your constituents. AOC shifted in her seat. Senator, you're oversimplifying a complex issue. There were serious concerns about gentrification, about the impact on local communities. Oh, I'm definitely oversimplifying. Kennedy interrupted gently. That's one of my many flaws. But let's stick with simple for now because I'm still trying to understand the math. You said New York was going to give away $3 billion in tax breaks. That was your phrase, wasn't it? Giving away billions. That's correct. Kennedy smiled. See, this is where I get confused. Those weren't tax breaks on money New York already had. Those were tax breaks on future taxes Amazon would pay on revenue they were going to generate. Revenue that wouldn't exist without them being there. So, New York wasn't giving away money. They were just agreeing to collect slightly less money than they otherwise would have. You can't give away something you don't have. That would be like me offering not to charge you for a piece of the moon. I don't own the moon. So I'm not really being generous. Am I? A few chuckles from the Republican side. AOC's jaw tightened. The point, she said, her voice hardening, is that we don't need to bribe corporations. Oh, I agree, Kennedy said cheerfully. No bribes. Absolutely not. So, let me ask you this. After you killed the Amazon deal, and killed is the right word, isn't it? Because the deal died, what happened? Amazon opened an office in New York anyway. AOC said triumphantly. As if she'd been waiting for this question. Without the tax breaks. Exactly like I said they would. They sure did. Kennedy nodded. Opened an office in Manhattan. Not Queens. About 1,500 jobs. Not 25,000. And let me make sure I have this right. Those 1,500 jobs are not in your district. Are they? Silence. Congresswoman. Kennedy's voice was still gentle. But there was steel underneath now. Are those 1,500 jobs in your district? No. AOC admitted they're in Manhattan. So, let me see if I understand the math here. Because I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Kennedy pulled out a calculator. An actual physical calculator, which several reporters would later describe as a power move, and made a show of punching in numbers. You turned down 25,000 jobs for your district. You got 1,500 jobs outside your district. That's a loss of 23,500 jobs. You turned down an average salary of $150. Those 1,500 Manhattan jobs probably pay about the same. So that's about $225 million in annual wages for New York City compared to the $3.75 billion you could have had. That's a loss of $3.5 billion in annual wages. He looked up from the calculator. Congresswoman in Louisiana, we'd call that a bad deal. What do you call it in New York? I call it standing up to corporate greed. AOC shot back, her voice rising. I call it refusing to be blackmailed. But Amazon came anyway. Kennedy interrupted, his voice still calm. They wanted to be in New York so badly they came without the incentives. Which means you had all the leverage and you gave it away. You could have negotiated a better deal. You could have gotten more community benefits, more local hiring, more affordable housing commitments. Instead, you killed 25,000 jobs and declared victory. He paused, letting that sink in. Meanwhile, Virginia Arlington specifically got their part of HQ2. They're thriving. Those jobs exist. Those wages exist. Those tax revenues exist in Virginia, not New York. AOC's face was flushed. Now, this is a gross oversimplification of "oh, I'm sure it is," Kennedy said sympathetically. "I'm sure there's a very complicated explanation that makes perfect sense to you. But here's what I can't figure out. You said corporations should come without incentives. Amazon did exactly that, came to New York without incentives. But they created 1.500 jobs instead of 25.000. So, the incentives would have created 23,500 additional jobs. Doesn't that mean the incentives worked?" The logic trap was perfect and everyone in the room could see it. If AOC argued that Amazon would have created all 25.000 jobs without incentives, she'd have to explain why they only created 500. If she argued that the 25.000 jobs were never real, she'd undermine her entire complaint. If she admitted the incentives would have created more jobs, she'd admit she was wrong. She chose anger. Senator, this is exactly the kind of corporate apism that has destroyed working-class America. You're carrying water for billionaires. Congresswoman, Kennedy interrupted, and for the first time, his voice had an edge. I'm not carrying water for anyone. I'm asking about the 25.000 people in your district who could have had jobs but don't. I'm asking about the schools that could have been funded with $10 billion in new tax revenue but weren't. I'm asking why you're taking a victory lap for leaving your constituents worse off. He picked up another document. And while we're on the subject of your district, let's talk about where you live, shall we? What does where I live have to do with you mentioned gentrification, Kennedy said pleasantly. You said you were worried about gentrification in Queens if Amazon came. That's a valid concern. Gentrification pushes out working-class people when wealthy people move in and drive up prices. So, I did some research on your residence. He held up what appeared to be a real estate listing. You live at the Navy Yard building in Washington, D.C. Is that correct? AOC hesitated. My D.C. residence? Yes. Tell us about this building. Congresswoman, for those of us who aren't familiar with it, it's an apartment building. Oh, it's a bit more than that, Kennedy said, reading from the listing. It's a luxury apartment complex where studios start at $2 a month. Amenities include, and I'm reading directly from their website, a climbing wall, several pools, racquetball courts, a golf simulator, a rooftop dog park, a steam room, multiple cycling studios, 2 types of massage rooms, and charging ports for electric vehicles. He looked up. That's quite a place. Golf simulator, massage rooms, rooftop dog park. Sounds lovely. Must be nice. I failed to see what my apartment I'm getting there, Kennedy said. See, you talk a lot about billionaires and the rich and how they don't need more benefits. You wear dresses that say tax the rich to fancy galas. You tweet about income inequality. But you live in a building with a rooftop dog park and a golf simulator. You shop at Whole Foods owned by Amazon, the company whose jobs you killed. And you park your Tesla made by Elon Musk, a billionaire. You regularly criticize illegally in the fire lane because you can't be bothered to walk from a legal parking spot. The room had gone completely silent. Even the activists in the gallery seemed stunned. Do you see the hypocrisy here, Congresswoman? Kennedy asked, his voice almost gentle again. You live like the rich while demonizing them. You shop at businesses owned by billionaires while attacking corporate America. You drive a $59 car while pushing a Green New Deal that would make cars unaffordable for working people. You're a socialist with a luxury lifestyle. AOC's voice was shaking now. Whether from anger or something else. This is a personal attack. You're attacking me personally instead of addressing I'm not attacking you personally. Kennedy said firmly. I'm pointing out that your lifestyle contradicts your politics. There's a word for that, Congresswoman. It starts with H and rhymes with hypocrisy. Can you guess what it is? This is outrageous. What's outrageous? Kennedy said, his voice rising for the first time. Is that you lecture working people about sacrifice while you live in luxury. What's outrageous is that you killed 25.000 jobs and call it a victory. What's outrageous is that you came here today to insult my intelligence, my state, and my constituents, and you thought no one would push back. He leaned forward. Well, Congresswoman, someone is pushing back, and we're just getting started. Chairman Roberts attempted to restore order. But Kennedy was already continuing his momentum building. "Let's talk about that Tesla since we brought it up," Kennedy said, shuffling through his papers. "In 2018, you attended a town hall with Senator Sanders. A climate change town hall. Very serious stuff. And you were asked about Tesla. Do you remember what you said?" AOC's eyes narrowed. "I've said many things about many companies." "Oh, this was memorable," Kennedy assured her. "You said, and I'm quoting directly here, 'For far too long, we gave money to Tesla. We gave money to a ton of people. And we got no return on our investment that the public made in creating technologies. You said it was time we get our due because it's the public that funded and financed a lot of innovative technologies." He sat down that paper and picked up another. That was October 2018. 2 years later in October 2010, you told Vanity Fair magazine that you had just got a car. An electric vehicle. You said because of CO you didn't want to take the train anymore. Kennedy looked at her with exaggerated confusion. "Now, Congresswoman, help me out here. You attacked Tesla for taking public money. You said the company owed the public. You criticized them specifically by name. Then you bought a Tesla. A $59 Tesla Model 3 to be specific. Does that seem consistent to you? I needed reliable transportation to travel between New York and DC during a pandemic," AOC said defensively. At the time, Tesla was the only electric vehicle that could make that trip on a single charge. "Oh, I don't question that it's a fine automobile," Kennedy said genially. "I hear they're excellent cars. What I question is the principle. You attack a company. Then you give them your money. You criticize corporate subsidies. Then you buy from a company that benefited from those subsidies. You demonize billionaires. Then you help make Elon Musk richer." He flipped to another page. "And speaking of billionaires, let's talk about that dress." "What dress? You know what dress, Congresswoman? The dress. The one that broke the internet. September 13, 2021 at the Met Gala." AOC shifted uncomfortably. "I was invited to attend." "Oh, you certainly were." Kennedy nodded. "Invited to the Met Gala. Where tickets cost $35 each. Where tables cost upward of $200. Where the wealthiest celebrities in America gather to celebrate. Well, to celebrate being wealthy celebrities mostly. And you wore a custom dress designed by Aurora James that said, 'Tax the rich' in big red letters across the back." He held up a printout of the photo which had indeed broken the internet. AOC in a flowing white gown, the words "tax the rich" emblazoned across it, surrounded by billionaires and celebrities. "Now I'll admit it was a statement," Kennedy said. "Quite a statement, but help me understand it because I'm confused. You went to a $35 per ticket event surrounded by the richest people in America wearing a dress that costs tens of thousands of dollars with professional hair and makeup done at the Carroll Hotel. One of the most expensive hotels in New York, to tell rich people they should pay more taxes. It was making a statement at the heart of the establishment," AOC said, sounding like she'd rehearsed the line. "It was bringing the message where it needed to be heard." "Was it?" Kennedy asked. "Because it seems to me you were enjoying the benefits of being rich while pretending to oppose richness. You mingled with Kendall Jenner and Anna Wintour. You posed for photographs. You had a wonderful time by all accounts. And the designer you chose to promote, Brothers, sells shoes for $700 a pair. Handbags for one lone $500s and a comb for $95. A comb, Congresswoman, for $95. He let that sink in. These are luxury goods for rich people. You wore a tax the rich dress to promote a brand that sells to rich people at an event for rich people. That's not making a statement. That's participation. The dress was borrowed," AOC began. "Was it?" Kennedy pulled out another document. "According to the House Ethics Committee investigation that followed, there were questions about whether you improperly accepted gifts for that event. The committee investigated you for potentially violating House rules by accepting impermissible gifts associated with your attendance at the Met Gala." "Those are the Ethics Committee's words. Not mine." He looked at her seriously. "Did you violate House ethics rules, Congresswoman? That investigation was politically motivated." "That's not what I asked. Did you violate House ethics rules? The matter was resolved." "Also not what I asked." Kennedy's voice was patient, but firm. "Simple question. Did you accept gifts that violated House rules?" AOC's lawyer instincts she had once studied to be one kicked in. "I cooperated fully with the Ethics Committee and the matter is closed." So you're not denying it. Kennedy observed. You're just saying you got away with it. Is that accurate? I'm saying the ethics committee closed the investigation because you settled it. Kennedy said. There's a difference between being found innocent and making an investigation go away. But let's move on because I'm more interested in the broader pattern here. He counted on his fingers. You attack Tesla, then buy a Tesla. You attack Amazon, then shop at Whole Foods, which is owned by Amazon. You attack billionaires, then attend their parties. You criticize luxury, then live in luxury. You promote the Green New Deal, then spend $29 on ride-share services in 1 year. While your office is literally 1 minute from a subway station. Kennedy leaned back. Congresswoman, in Louisiana, we have an old saying. Don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. You're asking the American people to believe you're a champion of the working class while you live like the rich. And when we point this out, you claim we're attacking you. We're not attacking you. We're just noticing that you're a hypocrite. The word hung in the air like a thrown knife. AOC's face was red now. Her jaw clenched. Several reporters were typing furiously. I represent working people, she said, her voice tight. Everything I do is for working people. You represent a district where the median household income is $66. Kennedy interrupted. You make $174 as a congresswoman, plus book deals plus speaking fees. You live in a luxury building with a golf simulator. You wear designer clothes to exclusive galas. You drive a car that costs more than many of your constituents make in a year. How exactly are you one of them? Because I came from them. AOC shot back. I was a bartender. You were a bartender 7 years ago. Kennedy said. Now you're part of the elite you claim to oppose. And there's nothing wrong with that. Success is good. Upward mobility is the American dream. But don't pretend you're still tending bar while you're sipping champagne at the Met Gala. Have the courage to admit you change. He flipped to a new page on his legal pad. But let's talk about something more serious than your wardrobe in your car. Let's talk about January 6th. The mood in the room shifted. January 6th, 2021 was sacred ground in American politics. The day protesters stormed the Capitol. The day democracy itself had felt fragile. Kennedy's tone became more somber. January 6th was a dark day for our republic. He began, no question about it, violence against our institutions, against our people, against our democracy. It was wrong. It was criminal, and the people who engaged in it should be and have been prosecuted. He looked at AOC. But I need to ask you about your account of that day. Congresswoman, because you've told a very dramatic story about your experience and I have some questions about it. AOC stiffened. I've been very clear about what happened. You have been. Kennedy agreed. Very clear, very detailed, very emotional. On February 1st, 2021, you did a 90-minute Instagram live video describing your experience. You said you feared for your life. You said you thought you were going to die. You said, and these are your words, I did not think that I was going to make it to the end of that day alive. He paused. That's a powerful statement, very frightening, and I believe you were scared. Fear is real, but I need you to clarify something for me. Where exactly were you on January 6th? I was in my office. Which office? AOC hesitated. My congressional office. And where is that located? In the Cannon House office building. Kennedy pulled out a map of the Capitol complex and held it up. For those watching who aren't familiar with the Capitol complex, let me explain the geography. The Capitol building itself is the one with the dome. That's where the House and Senate chambers are located. That's where the violence occurred on January 6th. The Cannon House office building is across the street, connected by tunnels, but physically separate. He looked at AOC. You were in the Cannon building, correct? Not in the Capitol itself. The Cannon building is part of the Capitol complex. That's not what I asked. Congresswoman, were you in the Capitol building with the dome where the rioters actually were? No, AOC admitted. But so when you said you thought you were going to die, you were in a different building than where the rears actually were. They evacuated our building. AOC said, her voice rising. We didn't know where they were. That's absolutely fair. Kennedy said, you didn't know. In the moment, I'm sure it was terrifying. But after the fact, when you told your story, you knew where you had been correct. You knew you weren't in the Capitol building itself. I never claimed I was in the Capitol building. You didn't explicitly claim it. That's true, Kennedy acknowledged. But you didn't correct anyone who thought you were either. You told a story designed to make people believe you were in immediate danger from rioters when in fact you were in a separate building that was evacuated as a precaution. He flipped through his notes. Let me read from your Instagram video. You said a man came banging on your door shouting, "Where is she? Where is she?" You said he entered your office with tremendous anger and hostility. You said you hid in the bathroom thinking you were going to die. You said this man looked at you with such rage that you feared for your life. Kennedy looked up. That man was a Capitol Police officer coming to evacuate you to safety. Wasn't he? Silence. Congresswoman, that was a Capitol Police officer. Correct. He didn't identify himself properly. AOC said defensively. He was shouting, he had anger in his eyes. He was trying to save your life. Kennedy said, his voice hard now. He was a Capitol Police officer doing his job under extraordinary circumstances. And you characterized him as a threat. You strongly suggested that this officer might have been trying to harm you. Have you apologized to that officer? I described my experience. You slandered a police officer who was protecting you. Kennedy interrupted. You turned a rescue into a threat narrative for political purposes. That officer probably has a family. Probably has kids who had to hear their dad described as terrifying and threatening when he was actually being a hero. Have you apologized? AOC's hands were shaking now. I was describing how it felt in the moment. But we're not in the moment anymore. Kennedy said. We are 4 years later. You know now what actually happened. You know that officer was helping you. You know you weren't in the Capitol building. You know no rioters entered your hallway. You know all of this. And yet you continue to tell the story as if you narrowly escaped death. He picked up another document. Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina has an office 2 doors down from yours. She was there that day. Too. She tweeted, and I'm quoting, "My office is 2 doors down from 8 at AOC and no insurrectionists stormed our hallway." She confirmed that your building was evacuated, but that no rioters entered your area. Why did she feel the need to correct your narrative? Everyone experienced that day differently. But facts are facts. Kennedy said. Either rioters were in your hallway or they weren't. Representative Mace says they weren't. The security footage confirms they weren't. The evacuation records show your building was cleared as a precaution, not because rioters had breached it. So why did you tell a story that implied you were in direct danger from rioters? I was in danger. AOC shouted, her composure finally cracking. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't know where they were. We heard they had guns. We heard they had bombs. And that fear was legitimate. Kennedy said, his voice softening slightly. I don't question that you were scared. But there's a difference between being scared and being in immediate danger. There's a difference between describing your fear and creating a narrative that exaggerates the threat. And there's a big difference between being in a building that was evacuated and being in the Capitol building where Officer Brian Sicknick died. Where 140 officers were injured. Where actual violence was occurring. He leaned forward. Those officers, the ones who actually faced the rioters, who actually fought them hand-toned, who actually bled, they don't get Instagram videos with millions of views. They don't get fawning media coverage. They don't get to be heroes. But you safe in your office building while they fought. You got to tell a dramatic story about nearly dying. Don't you think that's disrespectful to the people who actually faced the violence? Tears were forming in AOC's eyes now. Whether from anger or embarrassment or genuine emotion. I shared my truth. Your truth isn't the truth. Kennedy said bluntly. Your truth is a story you told yourself and then told the country. The actual truth is that you were evacuated from a building that was never breached while brave officers fought actual rioters in a different building. Your truth is that you characterized a police officer trying to save you as a potential threat. Your truth is that you used that day a day when people actually died to make yourself the center of attention. He let that sit for a moment, then continued. You even said later that you feared being raped. On CNN, you told Dana Bash that you thought you might be raped that day. Congresswoman, that's a serious allegation. Do you have any evidence that anyone attempted to rape you or threatened to rape you? I felt that I was in danger. That's not what I asked. I asked if anyone actually threatened you with rape. No, but so you felt you might be in danger of rape. And you stated that publicly. Knowing full well that no one had actually threatened you. Knowing that your statement would make headlines. Knowing that it would cement the narrative of you as a victim. Kennedy's voice was gentle but relentless. Congresswoman, do you understand how that diminishes the experiences of people who were actually assaulted? Do you understand how that uses the language of sexual violence for political gain? AOC's lawyer, who had accompanied her, was whispering urgently in her ear. But she shook her head. I stand by everything I said, she stated, her voice barely controlled. Of course you do, Kennedy said sadly. Because admitting you exaggerated would mean admitting you used a national tragedy for your personal political narrative. And we can't have that. Can we? He closed that folder and opened another one. Let's talk about your policies. Let's talk about the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal, Kennedy said, his tone shifting back to professorial. Your signature legislation, your big idea, the thing that's going to save America from climate change. Tell me about it. AOC seemed grateful for the change of subject, even if she sensed the trap. The Green New Deal is a comprehensive plan to address climate change while creating millions of jobs. How much does it cost? The investment would be substantial. But the cost of inaction? How much does it cost? Congresswoman Kennedy's voice was patient but firm. Ballpark figure estimates vary depending on implementation. The estimate I've seen most frequently, Kennedy interrupted, is about $93 trillion over 10 years. Is that in the right ballpark? That's an inflated number used by critics. It comes from the American Action Forum, a think tank that actually did the math on your proposal. Kennedy said, but let's say they're wrong. Let's say it's only half that. That's $46.5 trillion over 10 years. Let's say they're wildly wrong and it's only a quarter of their estimate. That's $23 trillion. He pulled out a calculator again. The entire GDP of the United States is about $28 trillion per year. So even the most conservative estimate of your plan would cost nearly the entire economic output of America for 1 year. Where does that money come from? We would tax the wealthy. How wealthy? Kennedy asked. What tax rate? A marginal rate of 70% on income over $10 million. The Tax Foundation did an analysis of that. Kennedy said, flipping through papers, even if you taxed every dollar over 10 million at 70%, you'd raise about $720 billion over 10 years. That's not even close to $23 trillion. And that's using the lowest estimate of your plan's cost. So where does the other $22 trillion come from? AOC was silent. You don't know, do you? Kennedy said gently. You proposed a plan that would require spending more money than exists in the American economy. And you have no idea how to pay for it. You just assumed we'd figure it out later. That's not governance. Congresswoman, that's fantasy. He picked up another document. Let's talk about the details of this plan. Your original resolution called for upgrading all existing buildings in the United States to be energy efficient. Do you know how many buildings exist in the United States? No, but about 130 million. Kennedy supplied. Even if you could upgrade each building for just $50, which is absurdly low. That's $6.5 billion right there just for the buildings. And you proposed doing this in 10 years. That's 13 million buildings per year. That's 35,000 buildings per day. Every single day for 10 years. He looked at her seriously. Do you understand how impossible that is? Do you understand that we don't have enough contractors? Enough materials? Enough time to do even a fraction of that? We would mobilize. You'd mobilize what? Kennedy asked. A fantasy. This isn't World War II where you can just convert car factories to make tanks. This is specialized work requiring specialized skills. And even if you could somehow find enough workers, you'd be forcing private property owners to upgrade their buildings whether they want to or not. Is that your plan? Government-mandated renovations. The climate crisis requires bold action. Bold and stupid aren't the same thing. Kennedy said sharply. Bold would be investing in nuclear power, which is clean, reliable, and actually exists. Bold would be streamlining regulations for renewable energy projects. Bold would be realistic proposals that might actually work. What you're proposing isn't bold. It's delusional. He wasn't done. Let's talk about jobs. You said the Green New Deal would create millions of jobs. But every economic analysis shows it would eliminate 3 to 5 million existing jobs in fossil fuel industries. Transportation, manufacturing. What's your plan for those workers? They would transition to green jobs. Would they? Kennedy asked. A 55-year-old coal miner in West Virginia who spent his whole life underground. You're going to retrain him to install solar panels. A 50-year-old truck driver who's been driving for 30 years. He's going to become a wind turbine technician. Do you hear how condescending that is? Do you understand that these are real people with real lives? Not pieces on your political chessboard? He pulled out more papers. Here's what's happened everywhere these policies have been tried. Germany spent $580 billion on their energy vendor. Their energy transition. And now has the highest electricity prices in Europe and still hasn't hit their emissions targets. Spain's solar subsidies created a massive boom and then went bankrupt, destroying the companies and jobs they created. California has rolling blackouts because their grid can't handle renewable intermittency. Kennedy looked directly at AOC. Every place that's tried what you're proposing has failed. Every single one. What makes you think America would be different? We have to try. No, Kennedy said firmly. We have to think. We have to plan. We have to use common sense. What we don't have to do is destroy our economy based on a proposal written on the back of a napkin by someone who doesn't understand basic economics. He picked up what looked like a print out of a social media post. When your office first released the Green New Deal, your FAQ document, which you later deleted, included some interesting details. It talked about providing economic security for those unwilling to work. Unwilling, not unable. It talked about eliminating air travel within 10 years. It acknowledged the problem of farting cows and suggested we might need to eliminate cattle. Kennedy looked at her over his glasses. Did you write that, Congresswoman? That was an early draft that was accidentally published. Was it your plan or not? It was. It was a staff error. So, your staff just independently decided to propose eliminating air travel and getting rid of cows. And you had no idea. Kennedy's skepticism was evident. Or was that your actual plan until people laughed at it and then you claimed it was a mistake? AOC's silence was answer enough. Here's what I think happened. Kennedy said, I think you actually believe this stuff. I think you actually thought you could eliminate air travel and get rid of cattle and pay people who don't want to work. And then someone with an ounce of sense told you how crazy it sounded and you tried to memory hole it. But the internet is forever. Congresswoman, we remember. He sat back. The Green New Deal isn't a serious policy proposal. It's a wish list from someone who doesn't understand how the economy works, how energy works, or how the real world works. And the fact that you've built your entire political brand on it tells me everything I need to know about your judgment. Kennedy was relentless now, sensing victory. Let's talk about your ethics since we've been discussing your policies. Americans for Public Trust filed an ethics complaint against you earlier this year. Are you aware of this? I'm aware of politically motivated attacks. This complaint alleges you misused your member representational allowance. Kennedy continued. That's taxpayer money. Congresswoman, money meant for official duties. According to the complaint, you paid $3,700 to someone named Juan D. Gonzalez for training and $850 to the Bombazo Dance Company for training. He looked at her expectantly. Can you explain why taxpayers funded dance lessons? Those were legitimate office expenses. For what? Kennedy pressed. What official congressional purpose was served by paying a dance company? Were you training your staff to dance their way through legislation? That's a mischaracterization. Then characterize it correctly. Kennedy said. What was the training for? AOC glanced at her lawyer, who shook his head slightly. I don't have those specific details in front of me. How convenient. Kennedy observed. You don't remember why you spent thousands of taxpayer dollars on a dance company. Let me suggest a possibility. You used taxpayer money for personal expenses or campaign activities, which would be a violation of federal law. Is that what happened? Absolutely not. Then explain the dance lessons. Silence. Can't explain it? Kennedy asked. Then let's move on to something else you can't explain. Your grandmother. AOC's eyes widened. My grandmother has nothing to do with. Oh, but she does. Kennedy said, his voice hard. In June 2021, you posted pictures of your grandmother's house in Puerto Rico. It had been damaged by Hurricane Maria years earlier and still hadn't been repaired. You posted these pictures showing the damage, the blue tarp, the poor conditions. And you said, I'm reading your tweet, just over a month ago. The Biden admin agreed to forgive billions in disaster aid to PR. This is what it means. Storms aren't the most dangerous threat to Puerto Ricans. Natural disaster recovery efforts that are gutted leave us vulnerable. He set down the printout. That tweet went viral. Millions of people saw it and people were outraged at how your grandmother had been abandoned. Except here is what you didn't mention. FEMA and local Puerto Rican officials confirmed that aid was available to your grandmother. She had declined the assistance. Kennedy let that sink in. Your grandmother refused the help that was offered and you used her suffering to attack the administration and make a political point. And when people called you out on this, when they started a GoFundMe that raised over $100 for your grandmother, you didn't thank them. You didn't accept it. You let other people fix your grandmother's house while you used her pain for Twitter engagement. That's not fair. What's not fair is using your own grandmother as a political prop. Kennedy said harshly. What's not fair is having millions of dollars from your book deals and speaking fees and refusing to help your own family while blaming the government. What's not fair is that your grandmother lived in those conditions while you lived in a luxury apartment with a rooftop dog park. He pulled out another set of photos. And speaking of political props, let's talk about the parking lot. What parking lot? You know what parking lot? Kennedy said June 2018 before you were even elected. You went to a protest about family separation at the border and a photographer took pictures of you crying at a fence. The pictures went viral. Everyone shared them. AOC crying at children in cages became a rallying cry. He held up the photos. Except these pictures were taken in a parking lot. There were no detention facilities visible. No children. No cages. Just you performing grief at an empty parking lot. The photographer, Ivan Pierre Age, later confirmed that you weren't actually at a detention facility. You were at a protest in a parking lot. Kennedy looked at her with something like disgust. You staged a photo op at an empty parking lot and let people believe you were witnessing children in cages. That's not advocacy. Congresswoman, that's theater. That's using other people's suffering as a backdrop for your political career. I was at a legitimate protest. In a parking lot. Kennedy repeated, not at a detention center. Not witnessing anything, just performing for cameras. And when people pointed this out, you accused them of spreading misinformation. But it wasn't misinformation, it was the truth. You just didn't like that the truth made you look like a fraud. He gathered his papers. Here's what I see. Congresswoman, I see someone who kills jobs and calls it victory. I see someone who lives in luxury while preaching socialism. I see someone who exaggerates trauma for political gain. I see someone who proposes trillion-dollar fantasies without any idea how to pay for them. I see someone who uses family members as props. I see someone who stages photo ops and calls it activism. I see someone who misuses taxpayer money for dance lessons. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice dropping. And do you know what the worst part is? Even your own people have abandoned you. The Democratic Socialists of America. Your people. The ones who made you. They withdrew their endorsement of you last year. Do you know why? AOC said nothing. Because even they think you've sold out. Kennedy said, even the socialists think you're not socialist enough. You've managed the impossible. You're too extreme for normal Democrats and not extreme enough for actual socialists. You're politically homeless, Congresswoman, and it's because you stand for nothing except your own advancement. The hearing room had gone completely silent. Even the activists in the gallery seemed stunned. AOC sat at the witness table, her hands gripping the edge so hard her knuckles were white. Her lawyer was whispering urgently, but she didn't seem to hear him. Kennedy slowly removed his reading glasses and set them on the table. He looked at AOC, not with anger, but with something like pity. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. He began his Louisiana draw slower than ever. You came here today to lecture us. To tell us how economics should work. To explain how we're all just too old. Too Southern. Too stupid to understand modern progressive politics. You insulted my state. You insulted my intelligence. You implied I was corrupt. He paused. And maybe you thought no one would push back. Maybe you thought you could say whatever you wanted and everyone would just nod along because you're young and charismatic and good at social media. Maybe you thought that your millions of Twitter followers made you immune to scrutiny. His voice hardened. But here's the thing about reality, Congresswoman. It doesn't care about your Twitter followers. It doesn't care about your Instagram videos. It doesn't care about your performative outrage. Reality is stubborn, and the reality is that your record is a disaster. Kennedy stood up slowly, which was unusual in congressional hearings. The gesture commanded attention. You killed 25,000 jobs in your own district and called it a victory. He said, his voice carrying through the silent room. You live like the elite while demonizing them. You bought a Tesla after attacking Tesla. You shopped at Whole Foods after destroying Amazon's headquarters. You went to a $35 per ticket gala in a designer dress to tell rich people to pay more taxes. He took a step closer to his microphone. You exaggerated your experience on January 6th. You slandered a police officer who was protecting you. You used the language of sexual violence for political gain. You compared detention facilities to concentration camps. You staged photo ops in parking lots. You used your own grandmother's suffering as a political weapon. His voice grew stronger. You proposed a $93 trillion spending plan without any way to pay for it. You want to eliminate air travel and cattle. You want to provide economic security for people unwilling to work. You want to force 130 million buildings to be renovated in 10 years. Which is mathematically impossible. You want to eliminate 5 million jobs and pretend they'll all become green jobs with no plan for how that would happen. Kennedy paused, letting each accusation land. You misused taxpayer funds. You violated ethics rules. You accepted improper gifts. And when caught, you claimed it was all politically motivated, never taking responsibility for anything. He spread his hands. And then, and this is my favorite part, even the Democratic Socialists of America, the people who made you, withdrew their endorsement. You managed to be too extreme for normal people and not extreme enough for extremists. That takes a special kind of talent. Kennedy sat back down, but kept his eyes on AOC. You called me stupid, Congresswoman. You said, I probably think you can land on the sun if you go at night. That's a cute line, very quotable. I'm sure it'll do well on Twitter. But here's the truth. I'm not the one who thinks you can spend $93 trillion we don't have. I'm not the one who drove away tens of thousands of jobs. I'm not the one who shops at Whole Foods while attacking Amazon. I'm not the one who lives in luxury while preaching socialism. His voice dropped to something almost gentle. See, the difference between us isn't intelligence, Congresswoman. It's honesty. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. I'm a senator from Louisiana. I represent oil companies and chemical plants and working people who depend on those industries for their livelihoods. I don't apologize for that. I don't pretend I'm a revolutionary while living like an aristocrat. Kennedy picked up his yellow legal pad covered in notes. But you pretend, you perform, you act, you tweet, and you convince yourself that the performance is the same as the reality. You think being popular online means you're right. You think having millions of followers means you don't have to answer questions. You think outrage is a substitute for competence. He set the pad down. And that's why your record is what it is. That's why you've accomplished nothing in Congress except viral videos. That's why the only legislation with your name on it is a fantasy proposal that even your own party won't vote for. That's why you're a cautionary tale instead of a success story. Kennedy leaned into his microphone one final time. The people of New York's 14th district deserve better than a TikTok star pretending to be a congresswoman. They deserve someone who will actually work for them instead of performing for cameras. They deserve someone who will create jobs instead of killing them. They deserve someone who will tell the truth instead of spinning narratives. He closed his folder with finality. They deserve better than you, Congresswoman, and I suspect they're starting to figure that out. Kennedy looked at the chairman. I have no further questions. The silence in the room was absolute. It lasted for 3 full seconds, an eternity in congressional hearings. Then chaos. The gallery erupted. Activists were shouting. Reporters were typing frantically or speaking urgently into phones. Cameras were flashing. The C-SPAN video feed would later show the view counter-climbing so fast it looked like a slot machine. AOC sat frozen at the witness table. Her face a mask of barely controlled fury and humiliation. Her lawyer was pulling at her arm, telling her they needed to leave. She finally stood, her chair scraping against the floor with an ugly sound. This committee is a sham, she said, her voice shaking. This is a partisan witch hunt designed to intimidate and silence. The Congresswoman is not recognized, Chairman Roberts said weakly. But AOC was already moving toward the door. You want to know why people don't trust government? She shouted as she walked, pointing back at Kennedy. It's because of men like him who use their positions to bully and attack. The doors closed behind her, cutting off the rest. The room erupted again. Chairman Roberts was banging his gavel uselessly, trying to restore order. The other senators on the dais looked shell-shocked. The progressive activists in the gallery were chanting something. but it was lost in the general chaos. Kennedy sat calmly at his seat, making a few final notes on his legal pad. A young staffer leaned in to whisper something, and Kennedy shook his head. "No statements," he said quietly. "Let it speak for itself." Reporters were shouting questions at him, but he ignored them. He carefully gathered his papers, stacked them neatly, and placed them in his worn leather briefcase. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the door. "Senator Kennedy," a reporter shouted, "do you have any comment on the Congresswoman's accusations?" Kennedy paused at the door and turned back. His expression was mild, almost based. "I think I've said all I need to say. The Congresswoman's record speaks for itself. Are you worried about backlash from progressives?" Another reporter called. Kennedy smiled his gentle Louisiana smile. "Son, I'm 74 years old. I stopped worrying about what people think of me around the same time I stopped worrying about what to wear to parties. I tell the truth as I see it, and folks can make up their own minds." "One more question," a reporter shouted as Kennedy reached the door. "Do you regret anything you said?" Kennedy paused again, considering. "Regret? No, but I do feel a little bad for the Congresswoman. She came here thinking she was going to teach us all a lesson. And she learned one instead. That's never pleasant, but sometimes it's necessary." He was almost through the door when a voice called out, "Senator, was that personal?" Kennedy turned back one last time. His expression was serious now, the folksy charm gone. "No, sir, it wasn't personal. It was necessary. Someone needed to tell that young woman that Twitter isn't real life. That performance isn't governance, and that the American people deserve better than sound bites and socialist fantasies. I guess that someone was me." And with that, he was gone. The hearing room slowly emptied over the next 30 minutes. Staffers gathered papers. Security cleared the gallery. Reporters filed their stories, each one trying to capture the confrontation they just witnessed. By the time the C-SPAN crew was packing up their equipment, the video of the hearing had already been viewed 3 million times online. By midnight, it would be at 15 million. By the end of the week, it would be the most watched congressional hearing in a decade. The next morning, every political talk show in America would lead with it. Fox News would run it in full with commentary celebrating Kennedy's takedown. CNN would show clips with anchors debating whether it was appropriate. MSNBC would call it a misogynistic attack while reluctantly acknowledging that Kennedy had raised some valid points. The New York Times would run a fact check confirming that most of Kennedy's claims were accurate, even if his presentation was theatrical. The Washington Post would publish an editorial questioning AOC's effectiveness as a legislator. Even progressive outlets like Jacobin would publish pieces asking whether AOC had lost her way. In the following weeks, polling would show AOC's approval rating dropping in her own district for the first time since her election. A credible primary challenger would announce their candidacy, citing the need for more substantive representation. The Democratic establishment would quietly start distancing themselves from her. But all of that was still to come. For now, in the empty hearing room, a maintenance worker swept up the debris from the chaos-discarded coffee cups. Dropped papers attacks the rich button that had fallen off someone's jacket. He found Kennedy's name plate at the disk and carefully wiped it clean. That was something, he muttered to himself, shaking his head. That was really something. Outside in the hallway, Kennedy's press secretary caught up with him as he headed toward his office. "Senator, you're getting requests for interviews from everyone," she said, scrolling through her phone. Fox, CNN, MSNBC, the network's podcasts, radio. "Decline them all," Kennedy said politely. "But sir, this could be. I know what it could be." Kennedy interrupted gently. "But I didn't do this for interviews or attention. I did it because someone needed to and no one else would. The work speaks for itself. Let it." They walked in silence for a moment. Then his press secretary asked quietly, "Do you really think she'll change?" Kennedy sighed. "Probably not. People rarely do, especially when changing would mean admitting they were wrong. But maybe, just maybe, some of her followers will think twice. Maybe some young people who idolize her will realize that charisma isn't the same as competence. That outrage isn't the same as solutions. That Twitter fame isn't the same as actual accomplishment." He paused at his office door. And if even a few people learned that lesson, then it was worth it. Inside his office, Kennedy sat down his briefcase and walked to the window. The Capitol dome gleamed in the afternoon sun. He'd been coming to this building for years now. Had sat through countless hearings. Asked countless questions. Fought countless battles. This one had been different. Not because it was particularly important in the grand scheme of things. Congress would keep functioning whether AOC changed or not. But because sometimes someone had to stand up and say, the emperor has no clothes. The revolutionary has no revolution. The socialist has no solutions. Someone had to speak the uncomfortable truth that everyone else was too polite or too scared to say. And today that someone had been a 74-year-old senator from Louisiana with a country accent and a sharp mind. Kennedy smiled to himself, sat down at his desk, and got back to work. There were still bills to read, constituents to serve, and a country to help govern. The show was over. The work continued. 3 months later, on a quiet Saturday morning, Kennedy was having breakfast at a diner in Baton Rouge when a young woman approached his table. She was in her mid-20s, wearing a college sweatshirt. "Senator Kennedy," she asked hesitantly. "That's me," he said, setting down his coffee. "Can I help you? I just wanted to say I watched your hearing with AOC. I've been following her for years. I thought she was amazing. I volunteered for her campaign. I defended her online constantly." Kennedy waited, and after watching that hearing, after seeing you lay out everything she'd done, and said after checking the facts myself, I realized I'd been fooled. I'd been so caught up in the performance, in how inspiring she seemed, that I never actually looked at what she'd accomplished or failed to accomplish. The young woman paused. "You made me realize that I need to care more about results than rhetoric. About substance than style. About truth than tribal loyalty. So, thank you." Kennedy stood and shook her hand. "Young lady, you just made my whole week. The fact that you were willing to question your assumptions, to check the facts, to think critically, that's what this country needs. Don't ever lose that." After she left, Kennedy's wife, who had been sitting across from him, raised an eyebrow. "Well, I guess it was worth it after all." Kennedy smiled. "I guess it was." He went back to his breakfast. A satisfied man. Outside, life went on. The sun shone. Traffic moved. People went about their business. And in Washington, the show continued. But somewhere a few people were thinking instead of just performing, and that Senator John Kennedy figured was